Welcome back to another episode of the Style Frame Saturdays podcast, where great motion design starts with one favorite frame and the fresh ideas behind it. I'm your host, Caroline Lee, and today we're joined by Billy Woodward, founder of and art director over at Backslider brand. Billy, thank you so much for joining me on the show. How's everything going?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so stoked. Everything's great. Everything's fantastic. How about
you? It's going well. You know, we're at the tail end of the week, so you can never complain about a Friday Eve. But otherwise peachy, no complaints over here either.
That's great. And we're cruising into spring, so that's
That is true. That is true. I know the both of us are in this sort of northeast corridor, so I think we're probably both looking forward to much warmer temperatures than we've had over here recently.
Yeah.
Well, before we dive into the project portion of the show, I'd love for our audience to know a little bit more about you first. So for anyone who might be unfamiliar with you and your work, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the field of motion design?
Sure, absolutely. Let's see. Now I date myself, but I've been in the field for 20 years, which is nuts. So I'm an animator and creative director. I have my own boutique studio here in Brooklyn, New York, called Backslider brand. I got my start in documentary broadcast television. I have kind of pivoted into a couple different arenas. I'm mainly in documentary film now, with also tech and branded content, a little bit of commercials. I've worked with companies like Rolling Stone, ESPN, directors like Cameron Crowe, which was incredible. And most recently, I've started to do a lot of AI filmmaking. I've been kind of an early adopter into that entire arena. I'm most interested in how this new tech and these new tools can be leveraged in a human way to accelerate creativity and storytelling. And I find the space just groundbreaking and exciting, especially when you approach it from a hybrid workflow. So that's sort of the short and sweet. We can dive into any of the nuance that you want and any of the weird pivots my career has taken.
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, I'm eager to jump into the favorite frame that you're sharing with us today, because as you said, you've started to use generative AI tools, and I know that you used it for this frame that you're sharing with us. And I know it's been a topic that's been lighting up, pretty much every corner of our industry at the moment, but, we'll get into that. Regardless, sure. Let's start at the very beginning. Could you give us an overview of the frame that you're sharing, as well as the project that it's a part of?
Sure. Yeah. So this was a project I did for And Studio, whose main client was My Prize. So this was the first time there was really a celebrity tie-in that had given their approval and likeness to be recreated with AI. And the commercial was exploring this online gaming and gambling site that was essentially putting James Harden into the gaming worlds. So the frame that I shared was really kind of my aha moment, where I saw so many different skill sets kind of like combine in different mediums, combine within AI. And honestly, I mean, this came out in the fall of last year, and the tools have accelerated to such a point that even the amount of work it took to get me to that place now would be quite a bit easier. But just to talk to the frame itself, that moment was sort of a turnkey moment in the ad, where we see the realistic version of James Harden and his gaming crew transforming into a CG/Pixar style of themselves. So you had realistic generations, CG family friendly generations, and then Hollywood style VFX all happening at the same time, very much directed. So it really blew my mind at that moment. It's like, oh wow, you can cross-pollinate these different mediums in one. It's not as simple as, you just, everybody thinks it's just type a prompt and off it comes. But once you really get into the weeds of crafting this and needing consistency and having a real vision for what the shot needs to be, it becomes quite a bit more legwork and a lot more like in the weeds work. And yeah, that frame itself was definitely kind of an aha moment where it kind of opened the floodgates of potential, where I was like, oh, I can see exactly where this is going from a production and workflow standpoint, especially for traditional houses, and how this is going to alleviate a lot of pressures, accelerate creativity, accelerate efficiency. So, yeah, exciting.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and remind me again really quick. You said the client that you did this for was who again?
So the main client was my prize, and
My
then
Prize
this was for an agency called and Studio.
and Studio. Okay.
Yeah.
So were they when they approached you, were they sort of like more or less saying we definitely want to use AI, or did you as sort of the creative delivering the deliverables say like, this is a great opportunity for AI?
It was the former. They
Oh,
wanted
really?
AI. So it
Okay.
was, yeah. Just to touch a little sidebar, the community right now, I mean, it's blown up over the past handful of months, but the amount of creatives, especially early adopters, who have been stress testing these tools and seeing, can you tell stories with this? Is there a way to, get consistency and make it feel human in the way that you can manipulate these tools? Um, so many people were sharing what they were creating, and you have a lot of different studios that are interested and a lot that are just kind of like bullish on the tech. And so that's what these guys were. They were like, they wanted to create an AI ad, especially one of the first with a celebrity tie-in who had given his blessing. Yes, make me an AI. So, because little contentious, but
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen the tides turn quite a bit in the past year. So,
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the larger sort of like conversations and debates that we're having about is like the whole IP likeness element of it, because that, you know, in different hands could go one of two ways. So I understand where some of the concerns could probably come from that. But no, of course, obviously getting his blessing, obviously makes this project so much easier to do. But let's rewind a little bit though, the brief. You had kind of talked about how, they were like, we want to like use James Harden and, sort of gamify him in this way. Other than that, like what else was there to the brief? Like, what problem, if any, were they trying to solve? Or was it really just sort of the idea of we want to really stress test this new tech and create an ad with it? And yeah, of course, kind of use that celebrity image to kind of, push it forward, the idea forward.
right. Well, I mean, that really, I think, was the impetus to use AI, was just the
Okay.
grandiosity of the approach, which was to say, we want to put James Harden in these games. So at first, I mean, the project took so many turns. Originally, it was going to have an anime style, plus more of like a Pixar style. It was going to touch on a couple different aesthetics. Um, each time that we pivoted, it stayed within that larger scope of, okay, great, the sky's the limit, but there are a couple of workflow issues that I learned the hard way. Again, this is a completely new medium. A lot of the tools were still catching up for professional use. A lot of the way that you would approach a project in the traditional route simply doesn't work with AI. So you have to
Interesting.
change a couple of the approval rounds and when you lock. So it was a learning experience for me. They were beautiful and wonderful with the amount of creative freedom that they gave, and then also because they came to the table knowing that it was AI and seeing James Harden in these different games, it really gave me just kind of carte blanche to like figure out what was going to happen within these games. They're like, here's the list of games. What are we doing? And so it was figuring out that flow, figuring out that story. Why was this happening? How was this happening? What was the button? What was the payoff? So it was fun. It was a really exciting project, and it was a lot of in the weeds, but I think the payoff was well worth it.
Yeah, I'd love if you could kind of dive into sort of that story of development a little bit further, if you don't mind, because, I guess what I'm wondering too, whether you're tool agnostic, what is like sort of like one of the first things you're doing when you're figuring out sort of the story for a project? What's the Billy Woodward ritual when first starting out?
For sure. No, no. Yeah, so give you like quick background. So I grew up like Disney kid, Pixar kid, like Tom and Jerry kid. So I think if you grow up with a healthy diet of those stories, storytelling kind of becomes embedded in you. And following that path forward, especially getting into things like documentary filmmaking, the narrative and service to the story is key. It's number one. It's like pretty visuals are one thing, but you're trying to communicate a story. Um, and before I dive into my philosophy, I will say one of my favorite books on the topic is by Brian McDonald, called it Invisible Ink. He did a bunch of, I think, talks with Pixar, just kind of giving them a bit of insights from his perspective of storytelling. And so when a brief like this comes, my first question is, okay, well, why is this happening? What is happening and why is it happening? And I knew that this was going to be fun. This was James Harden, and he was going to go into these games, and it was supposed to show the excitement and the community of being able to play in these games. But initially, the prompt was just James Harden. So that splintered at one point, because once we saw just James Harden in these games, you're losing the community aspect. So then it was like, well, what if it's multiple James Hardens? What if it's a multiverse of James Hardens from many parts of his career? Tried that. We had multiple James Hardens now joining him on this journey. That was still not quite singing. So where we ended up landing was seeing some of the gaming community members joining him. And then that really was kind of like the story unlock, which was great. All of these individual players are interacting with this game in different environments from different parts of life, and they're all pulled into this singular experience, which is fun, it's exciting, it's accessible. And then the button on the end is that we're seeing James come back to his initial starting point of the NBA game on his pile of coins. So it's very like, it's like that's the win. He's the winner.
Well, no, and it's cool too, because it kind of sounds like, when I was watching the film on your website and looking at sort of the stuff you sent over, I was kind of wondering myself. I was just like, oh, I wonder, like who the audience was for this, or like, was there, talk about new tools that you're trying to figure out and stress test, like how much exploration was playing into sort of like figuring out the tone and theme of this project. And it kind of sounds like it was kind of like all of those things, like a little R&D, sort of experimentation with the tool itself, and, a little R&D even with the story too. I mean, like you were saying, there's, we were doing all the James Hardens, and like that wasn't getting the point across. So then we really had to figure out like who's playing these games and kind of like introduce them into the story. So, I just love that the story kind of fell together through just a lot of experimentation, it sounds like, at least.
100%. Yeah. I mean, from the initial brief, which laid out the idea, there was a total evolution just through the storyboards. And it was like, going through that process over and over again, which if you want, I can talk to some of the insights so anybody in your audience who is, thinking about jumping into this workflow, or maybe is already in it, I think it would just be insightful to know that if you come from a traditional background, normally what's going to happen is you're going to have a script that you're working off of. You're going to then translate that to storyboards. That storyboard is going to get approved, maybe through a couple of iterations once you have it dialed in. Then you're going to go through style boards, get your style frames, make sure everything is exactly like it should look. And then once you move into actual production, you have your rough pass, your rough cut, your blocking pass, your refining, iteration over iteration. AI is not that. AI, because you, at least at this moment, and it's changing, but you have the constraints of the generation that you're working with. When you do your storyboards, they in essence act as also your start frames for video generation, because you can get your story and style frames at the same time. So the process that I now, after doing this quite a few times since, is that you create, which is in essence like beauty sheets. Like you're seeing your key characters, your environments, your clothing. You're getting that locked before you touch your storyboards. So wow. All of the look, the aesthetic, the direction, all that can come from a couple of beauty shots. Here's their outfits. Here's the environment. Are we good? Once you get that locked, then you move on to the actual story slash style boards. And the reason for that is that if you have any tweaking along the way, it's way more difficult to go back to the beginning and have to do regenerations. There are tools and shortcuts you can do now. If, like, let's say in the 11th hour, they're like, we need his shirt to be blue. Like, if you do have to go back, you're going back to scratch and you're really regenerating. You can't, the tools now have gotten to the place where you could say, take this clip and change the shirt to blue. That does exist now, but your best bet is to get certain aesthetic choices locked at the top. And then from there, your style and storyboards locked. Then your rough passes feel very finished. It's unlike what you would do with traditional MoGraph or animation.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So wait, two questions for you now that you've kind of spilled the beans on how this workflow kind of comes together.
Yeah.
Like, let's say in the 11th hour, someone says, oh, shoot, you know what? We really do need his shirt to be blue. Like, are you then, if you can't like go back and regenerate everything, are you then just like at the mercy of just rotoscoping the shirt the whole time and just making it blue? Like making
that's where you're like, that's where your traditional skill sets are lethal, because you have, you're problem solving at that point. You're saying, okay, great. Are there any tools on the market that can do what I need to be done? If yes, great. Let's see if they can work. And if no, now you're in the grind. Now you have to figure out how to make that shirt blue.
Oh my gosh.
That's why I do very much like an onboarding with clients now. It's like, AI is very much possible. And if you want to use it to create, here's what you need to know. Because if we do have any of those 11th hour changes, that is going to be a reworking. It will incur extra cost. It's really having to go back from scratch if we want to do it right. Like, obviously, you might have those issues where you have to run and gun with it, but I think more open communication with the client at the top is what makes that less of a chance.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, I don't want to speak on behalf of people too, but I feel like there's this general consensus among people nowadays with this new tool that it's sort of like, it can do anything, lickety split, like no big deal. And the fact that you're actually saying, oh, no, wait, like if we're going to make changes, we really need to stick to like a production schedule of sorts and do our checks and balances, because it's actually not that easy to make these changes on the fly or at the 11th hour. So very interesting that, you know, I'm sure there's a sentiment, a wide sentiment that, you know, like this thing can do anything and, you know, it's going to be so efficient, save time, and we can, I don't know, like bend it to our disposal. But really, you're kind of saying, yeah, not yet, but we still need to kind of go through the system that we've put together since, you know, the industry existed to begin with.
100%. Yeah, you still have to have your revision rounds, and, you know, your client is going to have feedback. And the idea is like, if you're just creating to create, then yes, you have final sign off, so you can just have fun. But when you're actually doing professional client work, you have to have a pipeline that's similar to traditional workflows, but has to be catered to the constraints of the new tech. I will say this though, with how quickly the tools are evolving, I would not be surprised at all within 6, 9, 12 months if that issue I just brought up is a thing of the past. It is as simple as like, great, cool, I need to change this one thing that's in this generation without having to go back to the beginning. I know for a fact that's coming, but as of right now, if you're going to do client work, that's something to definitely keep in mind.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm sure, like any other sort of tool maker, they're probably listening to like who the audiences are that are using it, and they're going to keep building upon that so that it becomes that much easier and easier to make these sort of quick fix changes and stuff like that. So no, for sure. I'm sure that'll, when this airs, who knows, it might be here. So
yeah, for real. Yeah, it's true. I mean, there was just an announcement yesterday from Runway, which is one of the big players out there, one of the big models, and they kind of premiered the fact that it's real-time generations instead of having to wait, which has, you know, the wait time has become less and less, but real time, which then opens the doors for world building. And the idea that when I think of it from like a production workflow or actual filmmaking, to be able to have actors on camera and to be able to see generated environments or what would have gone through a traditional VFX pipeline what does that hybrid approach look like? How does that affect productions? How does that affect the way that you envision and are able to creatively change your direction, and ideate? It's kind of profound.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we still like understand the ramifications, but I think
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Yeah. No, full speed ahead. I don't think we've had time to really think about that. So well, I want to go back to something you had said earlier too. You were more or less saying like traditionally this is how the process would start for any client project. I'd start here, then I do some storyboards. It kind of sounds like with these tools that you've been using though, that, it kind of sounds like you're using it in a game way to develop the story and all the assets and stuff like that. I mean, because the approach is different, like how how do I want to say this? Like what was guiding the visual direction for the project that early on, knowing that you had to use these tools in a different way?
Right. So, I mean, that process was still very much the same as the traditional process, which was to say,
Gotcha.
here's a mood board. I mean, even within the brief, this is the aesthetic that is foreseen. I would say, which was funny, is I was still trying to approach it from that traditional place. So I shared with you some of the storyboards, like the early storyboards, and you'll see it's black and white, sketchy, and trying to communicate the story through visual frames. I did have a technique at the time which would take those storyboard frames and then almost one to one convert them to the end style. But it's just, at this point, it's an unneeded part of the process. Like, you might as well see the aesthetic, the art direction, the composite, everything within the storyboards, because you're generating that anyway. It would be the same as taking the time to do the sketch of the composite. And once you have your characters locked, before you even touch the translation of the story, it makes just that much more sense, because then you're asking less of the client to use their imagination. It's actually giving them more of what the final product is going to look and feel like earlier in the process, which is great, because then you can make creative decisions based off of static images before you've even moved into motion. So
Sure. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that the storyboards themselves, I mean, it sounds like all you would just need to do is add color to them and you would have your style frames or style boards or whatever. I mean, did you draw all these frames, or were you even using AI in this early stage of storyboarding to kind of create those story
totally.
frames too?
So I shared with you another project too, just so you can A B, um, from a film I did about Ricky Powell. And in that, my storyboards are all hand drawn. In fact, that entire project was hand drawn. Now, with this James Harden project, I also gave myself because they wanted AI, I was like, I want to see if I can use AI for the entirety. I want to see how good are these, how can we do? So all of those storyboard sketches are also AI. Now, that isn't to say I didn't feed it sketches, because I did. Like, I would give it rough sketches to say, here's the composition I'm looking for. But even if it gave you a rough, like within the Western section, here's a cowboy at a slot machine. I'm like, that's great, but I want the cowboy frame right, and I want the slot machine frame left from this angle. I could sketch that out and get closer than I would just trying to prompt it. Um, that's a real useful insight too, is that if you do have a traditional background, it's much quicker and more efficient to visually nudge the models along to where you want it. So if you can do that, do it.
Definitely. Well,
Yeah.
and it's, I know we've mostly been talking about, taking, even some of your own sketches, your own work to sort of refine what you're inputting into the sort of prompting to get back exactly what you need and everything. I'm curious to hear too, from a, sort of like messaging perspective, sort of communicating like a certain tone or feeling or whatever, how how are you conveying that to the tools themselves? Like, how are you making sure that when you're using these tools, like you said, you want it to still feel human. How are you making sure that that was coming through, even with like some of the prompts or, whatever you were inputting into the generative AI tools?
So there's a couple tricks. My favorite is actually, again, borrowing from the traditional route of what I would have done early in a project. One of my first things I do, like I'm very bullish on Pinterest. I love going on Pinterest and then curating a board once the, green light is a go. That's just sort of like, here's a mood board of where I'm at aesthetically, where I think this project should live. So I'll just have tons of imagery that says, this is the valley. This is where we're going. And if that is in alignment with the client and everything seems good, you can use that in two ways to get the results that you want out of these models. Again, now you have something like Nano Banana 2, which is, phenomenal when it comes to image generation. But even like Midjourney just came out with version 8, which, we'll see where that lives. But what you can do is you can take that curation of images and you can stitch them together in almost like a beautiful collage in Photoshop. Just put every single image there. You can do two things. You can feed that to an LLM of your choice. I usually use ChatGPT. I know plenty that use Claude. In ChatGPT, I've built like a custom prompt wizard that has been fed the literature for each of these models and then says, great, this is the right way to prompt for this specific model. There's a bit of a unification that's happening as of late, but I still find it's worth it. I'll give it to that LLM and I'll say, give me, this is going to be attached to every prompt. This is going to push it into the stylistic realm of what I've just given you. Get me to this world with my outputs. And then whatever it gives you is going to take some crafting. You're going to have to get in there and get dirty with it and maybe even have some communication back and forth as you A/B it and try it. But that paired with also within the model, taking that same image, you can now in tools like FreePick, you can set a style. So you can actually upload that main collage and say, take some of your aesthetic cues, your stylistic cues from what's going on in this image. And that'll help to influence it stylistically. So you have a couple of different options. And then again, it's all about play too. It's like sometimes what you think is going to work is not going to get you there. And then sometimes you just have to start thinking outside the box. You have to start playing with the prompt. You have to start feeding it some different imagery. And then once you find it, get something close, you can also take that generation and be like, great, feed it back in. I want more of this, but try and push it down this route a little bit more. So it is like it's some of the most satisfying creative play because it's like pulling from your third eye. It's pulling from your, like the dream state is almost what it feels like. Something that you see in your head, you're almost immediately able to visualize it without having to go through the process of like, great, I'm like an After Effects head. So it's like, I know the different routes it's going to take to get me there. Let me see how, but you can almost instantaneously get that result and then push it further and see where it maybe inspires you to go.
Absolutely. No, and play is a great word for it. I was going to use the term engineer because, it sounds like at times it does get very technical where you're sort of like, no, I need to tweak this thing here. And then, okay, I've kind of built this sort of like foundation that I'm now going to feed all this stuff into. But play is a great word for it because it's, I think, a word that, defines what we're doing as creatives anyway. So, I'd love to hear that that's sort of like the verbiage that you kind of use with these tools, because I think that can, help with maybe the fear associated with it. I know that there's a lot of concerns with AI, from all different aspects, not from creating, safety concerns, so on and so forth. But, I just love that you're using the word play. I just wanted to call that out too. And like you were saying with, sort of feeding it these quilts of, information to then sort of refine and hone in on. I mean, it kind of sounds like, all of your design choices of color, texture, lighting are kind of being pulled from that initial quilt and then sort of even fine-tuned. I'm even just curious to hear as well, if it spits back something to you and you're sort of like, I wasn't thinking of that, but that could work.
100%. And that's one of the parts of interacting with this form that I kind of adore the most is the happy accidents.
Yeah.
It's very much Bob Ross, it's like you're, because you're heavily engaged with the process of creation, and we can talk about the contention that is in place, because it is very much a line in the sand. You have some artists that just don't want anything to do with it, and then you have other artists that are just gung-ho, very much bullish on what it is. I I I can't escape the feeling that when you're in that flow state of creating, I grew up drawing and fine arts. When I got involved when I went to school for 3D. So that was my first gig out of school. When you tap into that flow state in whatever medium it is, and you're in it, when you're doing that with AI, it's scratching an itch that is hard to explain, just because it's so instantaneous, because you're able to sort of kind of go down a different path that perhaps, again, would have taken a bit more time to get there. You can take a peek. You can say, like, great, no, that's not quite it. Or maybe, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't thinking about that. That was actually outside of the box, yet it's somehow parallel. Let me go down there. Let me see what's down there. So you can end up going down these branches at just light speed, and it's not only fascinating, but it's so fun. It's like you're really able to get what's in your mind's eye out faster. And I've said this, no matter what the medium of choice is, whether it's you're a musician, visual arts, whatever it might be, that when you're creating, you have a back catalog of references that you're working with, the things that stuck with you since you were young. And all of that is going to influence your taste making, your decision making. Everything that speaks to you is going to show up in your decisions and in what you decide to create. And I often say it's almost like you are the cheesecloth. All the information is coming in, and what comes out the other end is uniquely yours, because it's your unique experience in life that is influencing your art. So when it comes to interacting with AI, it's very much that. It's like you're in the driver's seat. You decide where you're going, and you can toss as much at it as you want to. You can extract pieces of it. You can combine it with your own traditional work. There are no rules. It is truly uncharted territory. It is like, you'll hear it a lot. It's like, there's no gatekeepers at this point. It's just get in there, and see what you can make.
Yeah, I love the cheesecloth comment too, because that was actually going to be one of the next questions I wanted to ask you, because, maybe we can start talking about the debate of generative AI use as well, following up on this question. But, like you were saying, you're putting so much of yourself into projects, regardless of the tools. And I guess I was just kind of wondering, with that being said, how you maintain such a strong human-centered creative direction with your projects when you're using a tool like generative AI. And then, additionally after that, if you come across any concerns while you're using the tools, if it's not, I don't know, let's, pros and cons. Let's talk about the pros and cons then of the creative process with it.
I love it. Yeah, that is the thing that has been the most interesting to me, because I'm sure, everybody has heard of AI slop. AI slop is the term that gets tossed around a lot online, especially within the communities. And I think that when you are engaged in the process of creation, like I was previously talking about, you're hitting that flow state, you're very active in what you're doing. I don't think anything that is a result of that is slop. I think if it has that human intention, if you are just sitting down typing a prompt, out it comes, and they're like, here you go, there's argument to be had there. I think that's where you can get into the real contention. Then you kind of get into the realm of, I don't have a good answer for it, because I remember when I was in college, I had not yet embraced modern art. Like, I was more of a classics guy. Modern art, sort of like, I was like, so somebody threw some paint on a canvas. That was like my perspective. I was like, and that's art, like, get out of here. I would go to the DC, like the Modern Art Museum, and I would always be like, in college, I learned to love it. And I really understood I had a great teacher. It's conceptual. These guys could paint like the master. There was that idea. Marcel Duchamp, puts a urinal out at an art show, and people sit there like this. So there, that I think is where probably that's the front lines of the debate. Somebody taking a thought, creating it with just a prompt. This is art. Is it? That's where it is. I think on the other end of the spectrum, if you have somebody who's really in there and is crafting and is pulling from different resources, I think that's undeniably a human creation. That is somebody who is spent the time, they've used their references, they've used their inspirations to make creative decisions. It would be the same as if you were to sit down with any sort of digital package, like think about Photoshop and the amount of tools that have been available there, or in After Effects, or in Cinema 4D. Like all of them have shortcuts and advancements. Every time an upgrade would come, it's like, oh, now I can do this so much easier. And that was always celebrated. AI has taken just a bulk of that work out, seemingly, seemingly out of the equation. And I think that has ruffled a lot of feathers of people who have invested their careers as technicians in learning a craft, and they consider it a craft, and they feel insulted by the fact that this is something that can give a result that at surface level appears like what they're able to do, and in their eyes diminishes their. So I understand the contention. I understand the those sides of the cons. I would say from my perspective, the constraints that I mentioned earlier that are in place as of right now are reasons for those people not to be as concerned. There is a lack of customization with those final generations, that when you build something in 3D, it's there. Like you can change the lighting, you can pivot around in the camera. That isn't, you can get a completely new sweeping of the camera movement, whatever you want, you can customize. With AI, that's not quite the case. Like you still have to do quite a bit of that front loading. So the short and sweet of it, I think, is that, in my opinion, AI is certainly art. Like when people are engaged in the creative process using AI as a tool, it's undeniably art. The cons, absolutely, there are IP issues. There are the safety issues, like you said. Like, I think that there's going to have to be even more communication to the public at large when they're seeing something that is AI, especially when it mimics real videos of current events or politicians. That was my first concern, even when Runway put out version 3 and it was still like early Will Smith spaghetti. I was like, oof. I was like, I know where this is going, and you won't be able to trust video. Like that trust has now been taken away, which is, we're already there. Like I'll see something and I'm like, is that AI? But it's got good enough that even me at points, I go like, this looks like user generated content that's AI. You'll see it all over YouTube now. And the YouTube ads, it's like not real people, but it's meant to look like there are authority figures on a podcast. It's like, it's outrageous. So that's my take as of right now.
Yeah. No, I know there's a lot of, on that angle, there's, I think, still a lot that is hopefully being looked at seriously right now in terms of sort of like, what are the regulatory constraints that we're going to put around it? I know that there's just like the race nature of it as well with other countries. Everyone's trying to get there first. So, are they lax on purpose, or are we going to implement these? It's like you said, it's the Wild West right now because everyone's just, it's like a gold rush, So yeah, it'll be very
about one piece of the larger conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
Visual arts, and you think about just one piece of what this technology is as a whole, and it's wild.
Yeah. I am very curious and eager to see where everything sort of lands up in the future. And when I say the future, I mean like a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years now, because it is. It's just, it's evolving faster. It's, the tools are getting smarter. The data sets are larger. I mean, you just kind of feel like we're always going to be playing catch up a little bit with it. But
I had a funny moment the other day, which was somebody posted, I'm a big Jurassic Park fan. Like I grew up and I loved dinosaurs. When that movie came out, I was just at the right age that I remember going to the theater and I was like, blown away. And somebody posted at like the Jurassic Park, they were like, age of AI. And I was like, oh, dude, we might get dinos back with AI. I have no idea. I can open up that door. I was like, this could happen. This could happen in the age of AI. I don't know. Um, but real quick, too, just using Jurassic Park as a great example, is that back to the fears from the artistic perspective, is that Jurassic Park's a great example. That was the first time CG was used at that level.
Hmm.
Um, I remember I was the big fan of did you ever see The Last Starfighter?
I don't think so. No.
Sci-fi movie from like the 80s. Was the first time CG was used for all the VFX. All the VFX was used for CG. Jurassic Park was the first time it was used at that level with something that looked biological, like actual animals, and they sold it by using CG and practical effects. And
Right.
what happened is on the aftermath, you had this huge boom of everything was on green screen, everything's CG. And you look back at some of those movies and they suffer for it. Like it's so obviously you see the immaturity of the tech. Like it just
Hmm.
doesn't age well.
Like
And then
Jumanji, that is definitely a movie that
there's
that's CG.
monkeys. Those monkeys. What are they doing? Who got to it? It was like,
Those
that
those
looks
monkeys
great.
could give you nightmares.
Mission accomplished. But then what happened is a return to a more balanced approach, like the J.J. Abrams effect, where it's like bring back practical, and
Yeah.
practical had a. Now you look at something like Mandalorian and Grogu, and what's going on? It's this happy hybrid of practical effects, CG, and they're married together. And I
Hmm.
think what we're in right now is the excitement of AI. So
Yep.
AI will likely sweep in and it'll be used for a lot of stuff, but I have a feeling it'll have its tail and then it'll be used in the exact same way, which is it is a more hybrid approach. You use it where it's necessary or appropriate, and
Hmm.
but it's going to take time.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm happy that you mentioned the Jurassic Park thing because I was going to say the same
Yeah.
thing. And I was also going to say, I don't know if you're a fan of Stranger Things at all,
Oh
but
yeah.
with the last season, I don't know if you watched the little sort of documentary that they put out after the last episode of the final season, but they did this like little documentary about how they built this last season and the sets. Like, yes, there's a blue screen behind everything to kind of like fill in the rest of the environments, but they used a ton of like models and they built the set like so much. I mean, like the set design was incredible and that's why I think it felt so tactile, in this last season. I mean, I'm sure they were doing it for previous seasons too, but because it took like 10 years to get through that whole series. I mean, you can even see the evolution of how they incorporated CGI and then probably a lot of that practical stuff into that show too. I just thought that was fascinating. And I think for a moment there when I was watching it, I was having this sort of feeling like you're saying right now, where I was like, yeah, there's always going to be some level of balance between old tools and new tools because you just can't achieve certain things with one tool versus another tool. I think there's always going to be that meddling of the two in the middle somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of vital and it's where it goes. And it's like
Hmm.
Dan Carlin. Have you ever heard of him? He has a podcast called Hardcore History where he has done like deep dives, like multi parts on just things like World War II. And it's like he gives you the on the ground, like for history nuts. Well, he had a sister podcast called Common Sense. And um, one of his episodes, he talked about how there, every time there's a technological revolution, there's always like a tail, and that tail of an adaptation. It gives time for you to get used to the new technology, but there's sort of a freak out in the beginning where it really rocks society. And he was just highlighting the fact that ever since the invent of not just the computer but of the internet, that those tails have become shorter. Like we got the internet, boom, we got smartphones, boom, we got social media, and now we have AI, and the catch up for each one of those are happening at shorter amounts of times. And when you think about it, it's so compressed in the grand scheme of things. Like I was born in '82. The joked about my grandmother about how when she was like, "Wow, when you were a kid, it was like, she was like, yeah, they, started bringing, there's more cars, and I used to walk to school. It's like, wow, and you saw that in like TV, like that's crazy." And it's like, well, look at like millennials' childhoods, cell phones. into smartphones, into social media, into AI. Like it's so profound that it's hard to, we're guinea pigs. It's like we're having to learn how to adapt to what these tools are and how to properly use them. It's I think that gets back to the conversation of the safety concerns, how there does need to be eyes on how this is used. Now, obviously, in the world of nation states, we can only do so much with what we do with it, and other places are going to do what they do with it, and it's creepy. It's like you don't know exactly where that's going, but I'm always a glass half full guy, so I keep on the sunny side. I said, hey, this is we've made it this far. We're gonna figure it out. We're ingenious creatures, so we'll figure it out.
Exactly. The skeptical optimist, for another phrase. Yeah.
Pragmatic optimist.
Pragmatic. Yeah, there we go. Well,
Yeah.
you've spoken a ton about how, in terms of this project and this frame, right? How the tools, you had to kind of use them in a different way to sort of build out the concept and sort of the visual structure for everything. But as you started to get further into sort of like building out this project and really started getting into like design and animation and stuff like that, how did the generative AI tools enhance or maybe not enhance your technical workflow and process? Like when you were really getting into delivering it, how did that look like? Like
Well,
what did it do for you?
well, the thing that was the most difficult, at least at that time, was that the biggest thing was consistency. Keeping consistency between shots of your characters was really difficult. Um, just before making that ad, and even during it, it wasn't one of those things like you can do now with a Nano Banana 2, where you can feed it multiple references of characters and say, I want to see these characters together doing this. You can give it very specific instructions and it'll do a pretty bang up job. It'll make the environment, the lighting look natural. It's incredible. Back when I made the ad, that wasn't part of the equation. So what I ended up having to do, especially once we pivoted away from just seeing James Harden and instead seeing this group of characters, was that I had to generate similar environments for each one of these characters with single generations. Then I had to bring them into Photoshop in order to create my start frames. And that was a blend of Photoshop and After Effects to try and make it look more natural, which, within your scope time frame, you can only do so much, which still was insane considering what the tools are. But Photoshop now has a feature called Harmonize, which will take a layer and will match the lighting and the aesthetic of the layers that are below it using AI, which I think it just dropped towards the tail end of the project. And I was able to use it in a couple places, but otherwise you were just generating different versions of the same character in the environment, tweaking to try and get the similar lighting, and then bringing it in to create your start frames. So that was one of the big technical hurdles I had to get over for every single one of the shots that had all of those characters together. And then you can imagine, then it was taking them from scene to scene and in different outfits and in different styles. So the tools certainly made it easier, but there was still quite a bit of in the weeds work, which was like, okay, great. I have to do another generation. I need to bring this into Photoshop and, clean this up, remove this, maybe take it over to After Effects and get certain amounts of like gloss on it to try and hide some of these bad lighting generations in order to make it work. But I will say this, once you have that and you feed it to the video generation models, a lot of the time, some of the things that I was maybe a bit more precious about in the beginning of the process, I learned to let go of. Like there was a certain leeway that would happen once there was motion, that certain things that I was like, this isn't quite working in static world. The minute that it would give me a video generation, I was like, oh, this is beyond passable. This is great. This looks wonderful. Like I was a little bit concerned for the wrong reasons, and I need to rethink about where I'm dedicating my time to tweak, not letting the perfectionist tendencies derail scope. So that was like, a big thing.
Yeah. Talk about perfectionist tendencies. I think that a lot of creatives, we have that because we're so meticulous with our work. I feel like we're probably going to be even more meticulous because we're sort of like, no, that's not quite what I wanted. Now I got to do some back end stuff, like you were saying, like getting in the weeds. But yeah, it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna. I mean, again, maybe it will. Maybe as it, gets smarter and evolves and stuff like that, it will. It can just spit out exactly what we're thinking. But yeah, no, I think that there's always going to be that sort of human touch element because we're like, that's not exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah. And just a future talk for a second, I already see it happening. And I think what this is enabling is that creators will be able to double down on original IP. People are going to be more inclined to be attracted to a creator because of the worlds that they build. And again, those worlds are going to be unique to that person, that cheesecloth. Like that is, and it's as it can get as niche as you want to get, and you'll find your people. Like your tribe will come to you based off of your interests and aesthetics if you're willing to create and you're willing to share. And I will say this: after 20 years doing this, I can for sure say pretty visuals are pretty visuals, but it always comes down to story. Like an effective story, something that's actually touching, something that is actually connective tissue with the viewer. That's always going to win, regardless of what the visuals are. So I think that this moment is actually a call to arms for creatives to share their stories, to use these tools, because never have you been able to do that at this level of quality, at this level of speed. So you can truly try different things and not. I'm training myself to be that way too. It's not to be so precious, but instead treat it like a conversation, treat it like a dialogue through storytelling. And I think that's going to be something we see more and more.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. Yeah, well, that was actually you. You must have like some ESP because I feel like that was going to the next question I wanted to ask you was, if you were going to give somebody some advice, to achieve the same level of emotional impact with their stories in the age of AI, and especially with these generative AI tools, what would it be?
Pay attention to stories. Pay attention to stories. Absorb as much as you can. See, uh, analyze the ones that resonate with you. Make a short list of like your favorite books and your favorite movies. It's like, why do these speak to me? And now, again, I'll go back to that Brian McDonald book just because I think it does such a beautiful job of demystifying the storytelling process. One of the concepts he puts forward is the idea of an armature, that every story has an armature that everything else hangs on. And that armature is taking the story and can be summed up into like one or two short sentences. What is it about? It's kind of like the moral of the story, but it's like your short takeaway. And he used Jaws as a good example, which you could put a couple armatures. And my favorite is that Jaws is about being afraid of the water. Like Sheriff Brody is terrified of the water, but at the end of the movie, he's on a sinking boat in the middle of the water and he has to swim back. So it's like if you can think of clever ways to build that armature, it'll influence and it'll give you always your why while you're putting together your story. But yeah, analyze stories, read storytelling books, listen to podcasts, just be curious about it. And I think most people lean into what they find beautiful or what the visuals look like. And I don't think that's wrong, but I think it's just one part of the ingredients for a successful story. So, I think people would be surprised how quickly their arsenal would just compound by simply being curious about storytelling.
Oh, so well said. Yeah, that's gonna be a I don't know, a clip that I'm gonna have to like come back to time and time again. Just I couldn't have said it any better. And I honestly I feel like I could talk to you about this for hours on end. I mean, I think for myself at least, I've had some contentions about AI myself, and I think listening to you today, sounds like you can still be incredibly creative with it. There's still so much of a human touch aspect to it that you can inject, and that's that's very comforting to me as a creative. So, and I hope that it's comforting to others too. But I always have to wrap up the podcast with these two questions, and I think you've kind of touched on them a little bit, but I always have to ask them anyway. What would you say was the biggest challenge and reward about working on this project and these generative AI tools?
Um, the biggest challenge was simply wrapping my head around process, truly taking the traditional route that I had been taking for years, trying to fit a square peg through a round hole and learning what this process calls for. I think that was the biggest challenge. I was able to figure it out, and it has influenced every project I've done since with AI. Um, and I would say the biggest reward was honestly executing on it. Like the enjoyment factor while creating it was a huge reward. I hadn't had that much fun. I will say this, just for any creatives that are on the fence, which I totally get, just play in the tools, give it a go. Don't be so hard-nosed that you won't engage the tools. Try them in your way. There are no rules at this point. Give them a go. See if you can tell a short story. See if you can't just get something that makes you excited about it, because the process of creating that ad and a couple of others have been so creatively rewarding. And I think it's due to the fact, again, you get that instant visualization of what's in your mind's eye, like being able to get so close to that with it's almost like light speed was very rewarding. And also seeing they took video of James Harden's reaction when he saw the ad, and so seeing that was also like lit me up. Like he was like so stoked. He was like blown away. So I was like, oh dude, that's great.
That's awesome. And then I guess what would you say, what about this frame makes it your favorite generative AI frame?
Well, it's not that it's the most beautiful that I've output. It's not that it even on its own that it's like you see it and you're like, whoa. But I wanted to share it more because it was that aha moment. Because to me it was coming from these traditional backgrounds and having to, like, I've done VFX, I've done CG, I have been on shoots, and seeing this one shot where you're taking realism, transforming it into CG with this swirling VFX effect, and being able to execute that through a tool like AI was kind of like a whoa moment. Like, oh, amazing. And having control, like these were the characters I had outfitted, I had chosen, I had tried to work with the clients exactly who was going to be where. We had some changes, but being able to get that to happen consistently for each one of those rounds was, I thought, like, oh, amazing. Like having to sit down and dive into particle effects and do this whole thing. Like I'm able to get this pretty quick and at the service of the story.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, very cool. Well, I can't thank you enough for, taking the time to join me on the show today. It's been really cool to see, your approach to ideation and concept development and how you're using these sort of new tools to sort of, push that even further. And again, just sharing this favorite frame with us. It's been awesome. If people want to connect with you to learn more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to do so?
They can find me at backsliderbrand.com. That's my main hub. I'm also active on X and Instagram. Both of the handles are Billy Woodward. Yeah, connect and say hi. And thank you so much for having me. This was such a good time, such a blast.
Oh,
Really,
awesome. I'm glad you had a good time. Yeah, no, I mean, this has been, I think, a conversation I've wanted to have for quite a while on the show. And I know that there's going to be, lots of different conversation around it. But, I just, wanted to see somebody's perspective on these tools, who's using them. And I think that you've convinced me, at least, that, there is still, again, that human element, and there's still a very creative approach to them. Contentions not obviously being, something that we're not going to be concerned about. I think there are still those regulatory things that are a concern, but it's a tool that hopefully is just a tool that continues to help us create. And so I can't thank you enough for taking the time to sort of walk us through all of this.
oh, it was my absolute pleasure. And I will say this: any of the creatives who do want to engage in this and create and share, I will give one piece of advice: have some thick skin. Because that contention is real, and there's a lot of people who want to voice their opinions on it. It's fine. Everybody's got an opinion, but don't. What's the four agreements? Don't take anything personal. I would just say that. Just have fun.
Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I totally get it. Yeah, I totally agree.
Engage in the positive. Everything's fine. It's fine.
Awesome. Well, yeah, again, this has been such a real treat, Billy. We'll be sure to share your information and links to some of the sources we've mentioned here for our audience to check out. But that wraps it up for today, everyone. Feel free to email us at styleframesatpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the show. And if today's conversation inspired some new ideas or takeaways, please share them with us in the comments. We'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and review the show on your favorite podcasting platforms as well. Also, come connect with us on social. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thank you all for tuning in. And thank you again, Billy, for joining us today. And we'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you.